Hey everyone, my name is Justin. Welcome to Junior Youth Sundays. This week, my friend Colin is going to be finishing our series, Canceled. It's going to be legit. So go grab your notebooks, go grab your Bibles, and let's get this thing going.
I remember when I was younger, I used to get so jealous of my little sister all the time. And the reason for it is because my little sister, for some reason, used to get what she wanted all the time. You know, the difference between my little sister and I is, like, for myself growing up, like, I was a pretty chill kid. Like, I didn't usually voice, the things that I wanted or the things that I wanted to do. But my little sister, if she wanted something or if she wanted to do something, she'd throw a temper tantrum until she got it. So I remember all the time, like, if she wanted a new bed, she'd throw a temper tantrum and eventually she got it. If she wanted to go to a movie, she'd throw a temper tantrum and then she'd get it. I remember, like, there'd be moments where I'd want to go to McDonald's. I'd ask for it, it'd get shut down right away. And I remember I got so frustrated, I got so envious and so jealous that my little sister, for what it seemed like anyways, like, I don't know if I was seeing things accurately at the time, but what it seemed like at the time is that my little sister seemed to get everything that she wanted. And I remember that used to frustrate me. It got me, like, really annoyed and upset. And one of the things that I realized is that as I started to get more and more envious, like, over time, I started to realize that it actually started to change the way, rather, that I started to behave. And what happened is that I actually learned, as being the quiet child, that I could actually use my sister to be able to get the things that I wanted. Let me explain. I remember there's this one time where we were driving by McDonald's and I really wanted to get some McDonald's. I'm like, hey mom, hey dad, can we get McDonald's? They shut it down right away. No, you're not getting McDonald's. So of course I quiet down. I'm like, okay. I'm thinking, like, there's gotta be a way of figuring this out. So what happened was I saw my little sister, she's sitting next to me in the van, and I just whisper over to her, hey Paige, we should go get some McDonald's. As soon as I suggested that to her, all of a sudden my sister's like, yeah, we should get McDonald's. So she starts screaming at the top of her lungs, we need to get McDonald's. And of course, like, my parents are like, no, we're not gonna get McDonald's. And then she pipes up even more, I want McDonald's. She starts screaming, she's screaming louder and louder and louder. And then eventually there gets to be a point where, like, okay, fine. We're gonna go get McDonald's. I realized in that moment, I knew how to get my McDonald's. So that became like a regular thing. Like, I'd be like, we drive by a McDonald's or a Burger King, and I'd be like, hey Paige, we should go get some food there. And she'd freak out, she'd throw a temper tantrum, and eventually we got what we wanted. But the thing is that there got to be a point where my parents eventually figured my plan out. There's this one time where I spoke a little bit too loud, and my parents overheard me saying, hey Paige, we should go get some McDonald's. Immediately, both my parents turned around. They realized what I had been doing at that moment. They shut us both down. We were like, we're not going to McDonald's for at least a month. Colin, I can't believe you're using your little sister for something like that. You're not going to be getting McDonald's for a long time. I remember I was just so discouraged that my plan had been found out. But the reason that I share this story with you is that when we allow jealousy and envy to creep into our lives, sometimes it causes us to treat people different. It causes us to change our behavior. Sometimes we act in ways that we wouldn't normally act. And what we're doing for this week is we are actually continuing this series called Canceled, where we're learning about how Jesus is actually calling us to love people that maybe don't look like us, maybe people that believe different things than us, people that we don't normally associate with. And when we look at the life of Jesus, at that time, people were often canceled for a variety of different reasons. Maybe it was because of a sickness that they had, or maybe a sin they were struggling with, or maybe being from a different culture. And the beautiful thing about Jesus is that he actually showed love to those people. Those are the people that Jesus actually included in his fold. And rather than canceling them, that's actually who he chose to show his love, his grace, and actually engage in relationship with. So we're going to be continuing that. And today we're going to be talking about this idea that, when it comes to the people that we're supposed to love in our lives, it's not just people that look like us or people that we want to hang out with or we have lots in common with. But we're going to be talking today about how Jesus calls us to love even people that we envy. So when we talk about this idea of envy, it's important for us to define it. And when we talk about envy, today we'll be talking about what happens when you stop simply wanting or wishing for something or some situation to happen and you let it turn into something ugly. Maybe it'll turn into frustration or into anger or self-pity or hatred. Envy is something that we can relate to. I think all of us can relate to it. And I'm sure we've all experienced it in some way, shape, or form. And envy, it turns ugly when we allow it to actually prevent us from being able to love others around us. Now, here's the truth. It's really easy for us to make excuses for our envy. We might be thinking, I'm not jealous. That person's just a jerk. Or I'm not being judgmental, but that person really isn't that talented. Or I deserve what that person has more than they do. And the reality of our envy is that when it goes unchecked, when we don't address envy in our lives, it can turn into a monster. I don't know if you remember from a few weeks ago, Kara, she did a great message in our Flex series, and she talked about this idea of the rage monster. We're going to be talking about how envy can actually turn us into a bit of a rage monster. There's this verse that I want us to read. It's found in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 4. If you go to the book of Proverbs, there's all this practical wisdom that teaches us some really good principles about, how we should be living our lives. And there's this really interesting passage that I want us to read. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 3 verse 4 rather, says this. It says this, anger is cruel and fury overwhelming, but who can stand before jealousy? What I want you to do is I want you to think back on the last time that you were furious at someone. Do you remember how you felt in the moment? And at this moment, do you still feel the same way right now? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But the thing about anger is that it's a big emotion. It comes and it goes. But the thing about jealousy is that when we don't address it, it keeps growing and growing and growing. And it keeps on growing, and what it ends up doing is that it actually causes harm to ourselves, harms to our relationships, and causes harm to others as well. So in the Bible, we're going to actually be going over a story about how envy destroyed this one guy named Saul. And if you're unfamiliar with the story of Saul, in the Bible, Saul was the king of Israel, but he had a problem. Because Saul had been disobedient to God, God had actually rejected Saul and chose a young shepherd boy named David to be the next king of Israel. And Saul knew a new king was coming, but he didn't know who it was. Now, when Saul first encountered David, he was quite impressed with him. David played music for him, and he even defeated a terrifying enemy for Saul's army. Maybe you've heard the story of David and Goliath. Goliath, he was this big, crazy Philistine warrior, like, blah. He came about, and David defeated him with a simple slingshot and God's help, when no one else in Saul's army was willing to risk it. Now, David became best friends with King Saul's son. His name was Jonathan. And David, he even led tons of missions for Saul's army and always did them well. But then Saul, what happened with Saul is that he let envy creep into his life. He saw the strength and potential in David, and he didn't like that other people saw it in him as well. And while David was being recognized and celebrated, Saul's envy began to grow. So if we read 1 Samuel chapter 18, we're going to read verses 6 to 11. We're just going to jump into the story, and this is what it says. So 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 6 to 11. So when the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing and with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me only with thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the lyre as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall, but David eluded him twice. Whoa, that story took a little bit of a turn there, eh? Saul, he wasn't just interested, he wasn't interested at all in celebrating David or recognizing his achievements. He didn't want to celebrate him, but he wanted him gone. Saul's jealousy and Saul's envy was so great that he decided to cancel David. Completely cancel him and stab him with a spear. Now, Saul's first attempt to kill David may have failed, but he was eager to try again. So what we'll do is we'll skip ahead a little bit to 1 Samuel chapter 19. We'll read verses 1 to 12 and just continue to find out where the story goes. And this is what it says. Saul told his son Jonathan all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had a great liking to David and warned him, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning, go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out. Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you. And what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he had killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all of Israel, and you saw it and you were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? Saul listened to Jonathan and took his oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. So Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation, and he brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. Once more, war broke out, and David went out and fought the Philistines. He struck them with such force that they fled before him. But an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul, and as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, while David was playing his lyre, Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear, but David eluded him, as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made a good escape. Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, "If you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and escaped. Crazy, isn't it? The story's crazy. And after David escaped, he ran as far as he could from Saul, with Saul in his pursuit. And the thing about Saul is that he didn't stop. He hunted David from city to city, and his envy was so great that Saul was ready to do anything in order to see David dead. But some surprising things happened in the midst of that pursuit. You know, David, he had the chance to actually kill Saul. Like, he had this moment where there was an opportunity to kill him, but he chose not to take it. Actually, David had a second attempt and a second chance to kill Saul, but yet he still didn't take that chance either. But David and Saul, they finally made a truce and promised never to harm each other. You know, they finally parted ways, and they would never see each other again. You know, I wish I could tell you that Saul totally turned his life around and he chose to love David instead of choosing, jealousy and hating him, but I can't tell you that. You know, Saul stopped trying to kill David, so I guess that's kind of a win, but it doesn't appear that Saul ever stopped hating him. And here's the thing, junior youth, is that not every story in the Bible has a real happy ending or comes with a clear lesson or a practical takeaway for us. But in stories like this, when we take time to examine stories like of Saul, there's things that we can do, and there's things that we can take away from stories like Saul to reflect on when it comes to our life and our choices. And I think it's important for us to consider how his actions line up with what we know about God himself. If we look at the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 to 39, he is being asked what the greatest commandment is for us to be able to live by. And this is what Jesus says in response. So starting at verse 36, teacher, they're talking about asking Jesus this question, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second commandment is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. You know, when we're not sure what to do in certain situations, how we should respond to certain people or people that we don't get along with or people that we envy, we can always come back to the words of Jesus. You know, whether we're feeling hints of envy or we're so jealous and we're ready to throw a spear at somebody, maybe you're thinking of somebody right now, Jesus' words can always guide us to love the people we envy. So the question that I have for you is this, junior youth. Who in the story do you relate to? Are you like David? Maybe you feel like there's someone in your life or there's a group of people that are always out to get you. Maybe it's a group of bullies or some kid at school. Maybe because they're jealous of you, or maybe you feel alone or confused, or maybe you feel like you've been canceled and maybe there's people that are just no longer interacting with you at school. Or maybe for you, you feel more like Saul. Maybe you've never actually thrown a spear at somebody, but is there someone in your life that you've thought about while we've been talking about this, while we've been talking about Saul's story? Maybe someone that you really dislike because if you're honest, you're a little bit jealous about them. Or maybe for you, you relate to both of them. And chances are you probably do because I do as well. There's moments where I'm like Saul and I get envious of people around me. And then there's times where I feel like David and I feel like I'm being mistreated because maybe people are envious about the things that I have in life. So here's the thing, junior youth, is that no matter who you relate to, whether it's David or Saul, I think we can all agree that envy destroys our relationships because you can't love and let envy grow at the same time. But how do we stop being envious? How do we actually stop envy taking over our lives and taking over our hearts? Well, here's the truth that we have to remember. It starts by finding contentment and fulfillment and peace in the God who made us. Do you ever find yourself wanting, obsessing over, or comparing what somebody else has or compared to what you have? If you want to get over envy in your life, you have to replace envy with love. And this is where it all has to start. It comes from getting contentment, or finding contentment rather, in who Jesus is and who he's created you to be. And when we find fulfillment in Jesus, and we find fulfillment in who he's created us to be, and find fulfillment in the things he's already given us, we find it so much easier to love those who are around us. including those that maybe have things that we wish we had. You know, just in conclusion, I just want to share a story with you. I remember for myself, one of the biggest reasons I used to be envious of others is when I used to compare my family to other people's families growing up. My parents, when I was in the 3rd grade, they decided to get a divorce, and I remember that was something that really just impacted me in a really great way. And I remember I used to get so envious of other friends that I had whose parents were still together. I used to get jealous about the family vacations they used to go on. I used to get jealous about the fact that they would all be together at Christmas time. And I always wished, like, God, why can't I have that too? And I remember I used to get so angry and frustrated, and I'd like have self-pity, and I would just get so upset about it. And I had to figure out, how do I deal with this envy in my life? And one of the things that I learned that worked really great for me is to have a heart of gratitude. You know, so often when we are caught up in envy, we're so focused on what we don't have, and we often forget about what we already do have. And the thing that I did have is, you know, like when I looked at my life, I did have a father and I did have a mother. Even though they weren't together, there was lots of friends that I knew in school that maybe didn't have certain parents, or maybe they had gone through the loss of a parent. And there was so much that I could be grateful for in the moment. So the thing that I want to encourage you with, junior youth, is that if you're struggling with envy in your life, take some time to just really be grateful for the things that God has given you. Be thankful for the fact that you can actually engage in a relationship with the living God that loves you so much. Because of what Jesus did for us on the cross, we can actually be in relationship with the God of the universe, and we can find our purpose and fulfillment in life and love in Him. So junior youth, just in response to all this, we do have some discussion questions at the end of this video for you to be able to break this idea down a little bit more. But thank you so much for tuning in, and we're just know that you're loved, and we'll see you all next week. Take care.
Thanks, Colin, for that encouraging message. And thanks for wrapping up our series. I feel like I learned something new there. I didn't know that David's wife's name was Michael. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if Colin even knows what he's talking about, but that was a super encouraging message. Thank you so much. Hey guys, next week we are jumping into a brand new series called Who We Are. And we're super excited because this is gonna look a little bit different than what you guys are used to, because our new series is actually gonna be following along with what all of our in-person live groups are doing at the same time. And our friend Sid Coop is gonna be here speaking for us. We are so excited. We're super encouraged about what's coming up, and we can't wait to see you guys there. So if you guys have any questions about junior youth or village youth at all, you can email us at villageyouth@thisisvillagechurch.com, and we will see you guys next time.